Oi, antenados, tudo bem? Hoje eu tô aqui com o dançarino e coreógrafo Anthony Heinl. Ele é fundador do eVolution Dance Theater, que explora o poder da luz em seus trabalhos, desenvolvendo uma técnica única. Hi, Anthony. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good too. My name is Katharina. I didn't present myself. How are you? You're good?
Doing well.
Okay, and I wanted to start off by asking you to explain to our viewers a little bit about what is eVolution Dance Theater.
Okay. eVolution Dance Theater is a company, and we make very visual, interesting shows. We really try to do a lot of ideas, use a lot of illusions, optical illusions, use of lasers and interesting lights to create something that's a really magical experience for the audience. And we really strive to create new and interesting things that no one has ever done or seen before on stage.
And you have over 6,000 shows in 10 years of activity, and an eVolution Dance Theater has had an incredible journey around the world. And I wanted you to understand and tell us a little bit more about how you have toured in various countries. What can you adapt do you adapt the performances accordingly to the places that you go, or do you guys usually do your shows the same in all around the world?
It's usually almost the same. There's been a couple times where we've worked in a few countries where we had to change a few things slightly. Like at one point we had a couple of guns in the show, and that wasn't okay where we were. And we worked with Disney. Also, we couldn't have guns in the show. But most of the time, it's no language. It's very universal. It's all very understandable without words. So usually we don't have to adapt anything.
And you usually you blend theatrical elements to your performances. And I wanted to ask you, how does that contribute to the storytelling aspect of your show?
Each piece, it has its own identity, and I really only work on the pieces individually, and then I try to put them in order in the show that makes sense. I grew up doing American musicals. I did a lot of things when I was younger.
That's amazing.
And there's kind of, it's a little bit different than a regular dance company, but I kind of understood that you do an introduction to kind of set a tone, and then you have a piece that is a little more funny, and then you mix it with a piece that's a little more poetic and beautiful, and you, instead of having a story, you just have a nice curve throughout the evening that I would say matches what I learned doing and working in musicals.
In musicals, wow.
Because the work that we do is at the beginning it's very experimental, and what we're always trying to do is create the most interesting option. And so we wouldn't really, for our company, we wouldn't really try to tackle a show like Peter Pan or Cinderella or something like that, because you always have to pick the choices that lead you more towards that story. And for me, when I have a choice of what direction to go, I just look for what's more interesting. And it's nicer to be freed up like that. It allows you to be much more creative.
I wanted to ask you, now that you're talking about that, can you kind of share your insights and how you develop the themes for your shows? Because they are always unique and concepts that inspire people that are watching. It's always a big production behind. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's a few different things. When I was younger, I really, really liked magic and books about optical illusions and those things. And I love things like amusement parks and crazy contraptions that people are building now, especially to move their bodies around in interesting ways or to do really weird or interesting. I'm just always looking. You just have to walk around all day and with an eye open, kind of saying, oh, it could be like a children's toy that you find in the toy store that could be adapted for adult acrobats, or something from a amusement park. It can really be anything, or even like a toy for cats, or it could be literally anything, but you just have to always be asking 24 hours a day, enough to make you almost crazy. Could this be interesting on stage with performers?
Yeah, yeah. And I want now to talk about specifically about your show Blu Infinito now that it's arriving here in Brazil. And can you walk us through on the creative process because it's developing a concept of ocean and life and I wanted you to talk a little bit about that.
Well, I always like to keep the theme of the show very open for those reasons. Most of the pieces have something to do or started out inspired by those things, or all of the pieces. And then some of them went far away from it, to be honest. But it was way more interesting going in that direction, so we went in that direction. And it's something I've learned. It just makes a more interesting show because I've never heard anyone walk out of the theater and say, well, that one piece didn't talk about fish or something. You know, like if it's good, they don't care. Like,
yeah,
you know?
Yeah, of course. And you also talked about like you worked in Disney, and I wanted you to ask because there is like it was a commissioned work that you did, and I wanted to ask, does it differ to the original products and the original ideas that you guys come from, like the company does, or does it actually? I mean, it's kind of similar. How is it?
We took the pieces that we already had in the company.
Yeah.
And we adapted them to Disney's music, or we put Disney elements in it. It was kind of a hybrid between our work and they sent a director over to make sure that we weren't doing anything that was wrong for the Disney brand. It was really interesting actually working with them. They have a lot of rules about how like Mickey Mouse can be presented in those kind of things.
Wow.
Oh yeah, you have no idea. You work with Disney, you get like a 45-page manual on just how you can act and dress and wear your hair and things like that. They're very, and they have good reasons behind all of it. They really do. They really have a strong brand and they want to protect it. So that was interesting. It was interesting working with something with so much more structure than us and so much more budget and everything else. And it was literally incredible. Like I would say, well, they have these lights that cost $400 and they have these other lights that are $5,000. They're much better, but we can use the $400 ones. And like, no, just buy the $5,000 one. I was like, okay, which is something I've never experienced in my personal life in the company.
Yeah,
That was the $400 light.
Of course. And
that was great.
Yeah. I imagine it must have been like a different experience.
Well, it's about quality. It's just quality for them. They want to keep their quality high, and they have the budget to do it. And
But eVolution Dance Theater, like all around the world, it has received like praise, both like by audience and by critics. Because I wanted to ask you, like, what kind of impact do you hope like your performances has on the audience mainly? Like, what is your best?
Well, I would say especially now. It's interesting. It's stimulating. You leave the theater refreshed and happy and curious. You're not being hit over the head with political opinions or whatever. For me, the true art of coming up with an idea, expanding it into something interesting, and people relate to that. I mean, it's for me the great albums of like Dark Side of the Moon or the Beatles albums were extremely creative. And we're also accessible to everyone. Like I'm really happy when there's a 2-year-old kid that can sit through our entire show and they like it. Like I didn't ever intend that, but somehow it worked out that way.
That's amazing.
A lot of times artists will avoid using the word accessible or open to a general audience or something. They want to, for me, you have to do double the amount of work to come up with an interesting idea and then present it in a way that's interesting to everyone. It's way harder. And some people will call you a sellout for that or things. And you know, I've heard a lot of funny comments, but it's actually hard. It's much harder.
Yeah, I imagine.
Try to do that.
And now that you have like this whole trajectory, can you share any key moments or like a milestone that you had that you think like defined the evolution of the company and all of that? Do you have any?
It's now finally, especially I noticed after the pandemic when we were shut down for a couple of years, we had a whole bunch of tours planned before the pandemic and they were all canceled. And now we just did our debut in the Baltic states, like up in Latvia and Holland and France just now, and they really like the show. And just seeing that, it's hard as an artist because you spend a year and all of your money making something, and then you present it in front of an audience. And until that moment happens, you don't know if you're like wasting your life or, you know.
Is it worth it?
And then when you get the good reaction, you're like, okay, well, I'm not completely crazy, and I guess this could maybe work.
Yeah. Of course, that's always important, like your public's reaction and your public going to your presentations and all of that, to your dance.
And even at the beginning, the first time I was really thinking that the company might work, because I don't know if you know what a flight case is. So
No.
they're those they're the big industrial expensive boxes that have wheels on them.
Yeah.
For transporting like lights and equipment and things like that. And at the beginning, I didn't have enough money to buy those, so we were taking things around in suitcases, and at a certain point, I bought a couple used ones, and then a couple more used ones. And at a certain point, all of our stuff was in these cases that had wheels and protected the stuff inside them and could be loaded easily from a truck and stuff. At a certain point, I was like, oh, okay, we did it. We're a real company now. It seems like a weird way to look at your success, but I was so happy when we weren't carrying everything around in suitcases and cardboard boxes anymore.
Oh, that's amazing. That's a big turn point. And I want
Yeah, it really was, actually.
Yeah, it's very nice, because like your whole like theater, Dance Evolution Theater, is known for like innovating techniques also. And I wanted to ask you, because it seems like you blend science with art, and I wanted to like understand and elaborate a little bit more how you integrate these elements into your performance.
Well, you can take a simple idea, like even an old optical illusion, or maybe a lighting trick that you see in a science museum. And then, because I went to school for chemistry and physics.
Yeah, I saw.
But I dropped out.
Uh-huh.
And I just knew I didn't want to do that. But it gave me enough understanding that I can break the elements down and change it in a way to make it work on a stage. So I can understand the concepts behind how everything's working, and then figure out a way to create an optical illusion and then put it on stage and put the dancers inside of it. It gives you enough you need the basic understanding of how the lighting and everything, all the equipment work.
Yeah, and because of that, like your proximity, like combining these two things, I wanted to know, like, how do you envision the future of this, like, fusion of technology and in dance performances, like these optical illusions? What do you see in the future?
Believe it or not, we're really low tech.
Yeah.
We try to use the least amount possible to create the biggest impact. And a lot of the stuff we're using was, I mean, it really was available like 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I see one interesting thing is that the pricing on everything, just like anything else, like video production or good equipment that would have only been available to a professional for $100,000 15 years ago, you can now buy for $200 on Amazon. So what's nice is that you're not limited by these astronomical prices that only a huge production or a television company or a movie could afford. But at the end, if you just need a solid idea. And now luckily, you can get the materials if you have the idea that you can experiment with it and try it. I think it makes it a lot more accessible. And because a lot of the things we do, even at the beginning, they don't work, or they sometimes take a couple of years to figure out how to make them work.
Yeah.
You're able to experiment a little more. You don't have to spend all of your budget on one video projector. You can spend 2% of your budget on a video projector if that's what you need, or a laser projector or something. It's much different. 20, 30 years ago, it was a completely different story. As far as the future goes, I don't know. It's interesting. We do, every time a new kind of material comes out, like they have this, like the blackest black paint in the world and all of these. Whenever something new comes out, I usually buy a sample of it and try it.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, honestly, just you don't need something that great. It's really more about having a really good idea and figuring out a way to make it work.
That makes sense.
I'm curious. I don't know. There's a lot of interesting work being done with video projection and new technologies. And you see it out there, like Cirque du Soleil is out there at the cutting edge. There's a few French companies that are doing some really interesting things. But you have to have an idea of how to use it to make it artistic and human, to combine all the elements in a way that's really interesting. And I don't know. I'm curious what's going to be what's coming around in the future. I mean, there's interesting things happening with holograms and things like that, but you just have to understand how to use it.
But that sounded like also an advice when you were talking about like the performances and the way that your company like started, right? Because you said it's like in the beginning you had like you couldn't even like afford to put boxes, like proper boxes to the equipment and all the stuff. So it sounded also like an advice for the people maybe who wants to start in the future a company that you can. How do you feel about?
If you start, I would say no one has any idea at the beginning what they're getting into when they start a company. Yeah. I did not. I was working with big companies and I had no idea what was behind it. I sold my car and my apartment and everything I found in America to make a show. I made the show. We got good reviews and we didn't have any distribution. So we did the show. Everyone's great. Okay. And now what? So it took like another year to get going again. So I've run the company into bankruptcy like 2 or 3 times trying to get distribution in other countries. The process of getting into new countries and things, it takes a long time. And you need to be able to prove yourself that you have hundreds of shows behind you, that you're not going to fly across the world and just not be able to put on the show, or it's just too much of a risk. You're moving actual people and actual things around.
Of course.
You have to, I would say, start small, have a good idea, and if your idea is good enough, like people will eventually catch on to it.
And
it's going to take longer than you think it will.
Yeah. And how does it feel for you? Like looking back and looking at where you are now in the company, where you guys are now? How do you feel? Because you're going to Brazil, you're traveling like in lots of places in the world, like I said before. So do you feel? How do you feel?
Honestly, for me, the biggest joy I get from it, because I had the lucky opportunity. I worked for Momix for a long time, and I got to tour with an incredible show and get to see the world as a paid young dancer.
Yeah.
And there's fewer and fewer opportunities for younger people to get these opportunities. So to be honest, my biggest pleasure actually is being able to give the next generation of dancers the experience I had, a show that they can be proud of, and in front of audiences that like the show, and getting to travel. I'd say my biggest satisfaction probably comes from that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And now just to finish off, I wanted to ask you, like, what can the audience expect from eVolution Dance Theater, in the future? Like, is there upcoming projects that you're excited? Yeah, that you're excited in 2024.
We're working on the new show now. I have to make a better show than the last one. Like I have to somehow. I don't have a choice. It makes me very nervous and very anxious, to be honest. It's exciting when it works. I hope it works.
It will work. Will. I'm sure it will. It's gonna be amazing. Thank you so much, Anthony. Então é isso, pessoal. Essa foi a entrevista com o Anthony. Se você quiser mais conteúdos como esse, acesse o site antena1.com.br e não esquece de curtir e compartilhar o vídeo. Tchau, tchau e até a próxima.